Today's lesson, we're going to take a look at one of my favorite animals, the bird. Specifically, something birds do that makes them amazing, which is to fly. Throughout the lesson, I've got various photographs of birds that I've taken over the years. Uh, for the most part, birds in flight. And I give you the name of the bird and where it was taken. And the reason that we're taking a closer look at bird flight is because it provides us a good opportunity to imitate natural selection. We've been studying natural selection now for a couple of days, and we can do a pretty good simulation of what happens in nature to imitate this process. And although I call it a lab, it's more like an activity, a simulation, an imitation of what might happen in nature. So, our investigative question, and this is nothing you have to write down. Our investigative question is we're going to see if we can change or improve the flight distance of a bird, really, it's a paper airplane, through the process of natural selection. So, can we change the population? Can we kind of improve it, so to speak? Or is natural selection always this kind of horrible, punishing act that happens cruelly in nature? So, our procedure is, well, your parents might think this is kind of funny. You're going to make paper airplanes. I need you to make 5 of them, and they should be similar, but they should not be identical clones. Because in sexual reproduction, the offspring looks similar to the parents, but not absolutely identical. And I'll show you the stage or the point at which you can kind of tweak your paper airplane to make it just a little bit unique from the parents. So you're going to make these 5 paper airplanes. You're going to number them, and then you're going to go outside and let them rip. Measure how far each one of them flies. Now, the measuring part is a little tricky. And I don't know, when I look around my place, I've got a sidewalk, and I could measure how many squares of sidewalk a paper airplane flies. Maybe you live in town. Or maybe if you're out in the country, you don't have a sidewalk, you could measure how many giant strides your paper airplane flies. Of course, if you have a big old long measuring tape, great. You could, check out your parents' tool crib, see if they've got measuring tape. I would love for you to be even more, that specific. But do what you can. You might be striding, counting, measuring specifically with a tool. But that is the goal, and you will find an attachment in today's lesson that looks like this. So for this first step, procedure 1, so to speak, you're going to put the flight distance that each bird flew. Remember, they're labeled 1 through 5, and I do need you to calculate the average when you're all done. Now, I'm not going to assume we all know how to make a paper airplane, so I'm going to give you some basic instructions here, and you're welcome to go on the internet, go on YouTube. You could find, probably 100 better, solutions to making a paper airplane. But I don't want this to become an incredibly complicated process. So this is the bare bones, simple way to make an airplane. And when I talked about kind of tweaking your 5 paper airplanes, it's this last step here that you could curl the wing up or curl it down. You could make the end kind of a snub nose. You could give it one extra fold on this wing. There are a lot of little ways you could tweak it, and so try that. I'd like you to make sure they're not 5 identical birds, so to speak. And at this point, go ahead and pause the video, make your 5 paper birds, fly them after you number them, and record how far they go, and come right back. All right, so hopefully that went well for you, or at least a couple of them went well. Now we're going to ask the question, who survives? Well, in the case of a bird, like any other animal, they have to find food, they have to have shelter, they have to escape from danger. Birds do something amazing, which is to migrate. And that has got to be incredibly challenging for birds that migrate thousands of miles. And one impediment to migration is large bodies of water. So some of those Florida birds that you saw and you'll see more of, if they migrate as far as, say, Mexico, maybe it's possible they've got to migrate back to Florida and cut across from the Yucatan Peninsula here to mainland Florida. And of course, they'd probably hit Mrs. McGeorge's favorite island here before they, if they got lucky, land on Key West for a quick rest. And of course, if they can't fly that far, if they've got to migrate the Gulf of Mexico, they wouldn't survive. Now, closer to home, an annual migration phenomenon is that our birds that are migrating through Michigan this time of year, going into Canada, they're going to congregate in the Keweenaw Peninsula here, and then they're gonna haul it across Lake Superior and try to make it to Canada, where their nesting grounds are. Even closer to home, one of my favorite places to go to look at birds and collect rocks is Whitefish Point right here. And if you're standing right here on Whitefish Point, you can actually see Canada on a clear day. You can see some wind turbines here on the shore. It's a really windy place. But those birds, they have to make it across Lake Superior in order to survive if they're migrating to their nesting grounds for the spring and summer in Canada. So what I'd like you to do is look at your data and take a look at the two best flyers. Which two went the furthest? And in my photograph of sandhill cranes, maybe it's this lead one, and this one is a close second place. We're going to say those two best flyers, they survive, and they become the parents for the next generation, like this male and female gannet that I photographed in Quebec. And to take it one step further, they're going to have 3 offspring, 3 baby birds, and we all know that the offspring look a little bit like their parents, but not identical, like this scruffy looking great blue heron here. I think he had a little brother or sister off further into the mangrove there. And you're going to go through this process again, and now you're going to fly the second generation, which includes 3 offspring that look like the 2 surviving birds. So putting it all together, you have the original birds you're going to take outside now. You're going to let them rip again. And you have these, in this case, bird 1, 2, and 5. These 3 died, but I'm replacing them with 3 brand new paper airplanes, paper birds, which look more like these 2, mom and dad. Okay? So refly the 2 parents. You have 3 brand new ones that look more like the parents. Let them rip and see what you got. Calculate your average and pause the video. See you in a few minutes. Welcome back. Well, this very lab is actually something I usually do in my flex class. So if you can imagine, instead of 5 paper airplanes, I've got somewhere between 20, 25, sometimes even 30 kids making paper airplanes. It's pretty crazy in classroom. So we use the same example. Here's the Keweenaw Peninsula. And we talked about how birds like hawks, songbirds, they got to migrate as they work their way up the Keweenaw. They have to make their way across Lake Superior here. And if they successfully navigate that, they survive. This particular year, you'll notice that we had 7 surviving, birds or paper airplanes. So those 7 kids got in front of the class. They showed everybody else how to make their paper airplane. And these kids right here, they got their choice of making their paper airplane looking like any of these other 7 parents. We reflew them to the nearest 1/10 of a meter, by the way. And this was our result. In one more round of this natural selection process, look at how many more survivors we've got now. Now we're up to 10. So we basically got more improvement out of our flight distance through natural selection. And you might not think, three survivors, 3 more survivors, what's the big deal? But it does point out a good, important fact about natural selection. It's not always totally obvious. It's not always hugely dramatic. In fact, natural selection often changes birds in very, or really any animal, any plant, in very subtle, hardly noticeable ways, oftentimes. And we notice the dramatic changes because this process of natural selection has been going on for so many years. And all these changes have been building up and adding up in populations. So let's put it all together. The steps of natural selection. And this is what Darwin recognized, over 150 years ago. He's looking at every population of animal and plant, and he's realizing things don't look identical. If you look closely enough, they're slightly different sizes, slightly different shapes, slightly different behaviors. And in our case, we just had a different morphology, physical shape of the wings. Now, I have 5 different paper airplanes here. They're meant to be the 5 that you flew. And then we applied some kind of challenge, some kind of environmental change sometimes. It could be a dramatic environmental, like an earthquake or a volcano, or it could be a blizzard, something more weather related like that. Or it could be a new predator moving in. And basically, it creates a scenario where some of these organisms are adapted to survive and others are not. Maybe they die of the elements, or they get eaten by a predator, or a disease gets them. Who knows? So we imitated that by eliminating our 3 worst flyers. And then those 2 survivors that went the furthest, they became our parents. Parents have offspring that look very similar to them, but not identical. So if you notice my 2 offspring, they're slightly different tones and they're slightly different sizes. And then it doesn't stop. This process continues over and over and over again. And maybe there's this little weird genetic change in the population, a little mutation, a random mutation shows up, where one day an offspring that's born with a little snub nose right here, and maybe that's an even better flyer than the traits that are in the population. And so then maybe one of those traits disappears because it's not as successful. And then these become the survivors. But that mutation adds a little more variation that wasn't in the population before. Sexual reproduction, of course, is completely mixing up all these dominant and recessive traits, these alleles, and that's creating more variety. And this process continues over and over again, over tens of thousands, millions of years, really. So, if you could kind of take a broader step back, in natural selection in the natural world, of course, it's not just about flying farther, it's about every aspect of survival, whether it's finding a mate, finding food, finding a place to live, a habitat, running away from danger, avoiding disease. And then, if you think of all the difficulties, if you are a bird or a monarch butterfly and you have to migrate an incredible distance, think of all the other pitfalls that might exist. It's amazing that anything makes it. So, hope you guys enjoyed making these paper airplanes or birds, whatever you want to call them. It might have required a little bit of explanation to your parents, which I think is a good thing. All I need from you is the Great Egret data table. If you could please show me your data, prove to me, so to speak, that you did the lab, and I hope you had fun. Thanks, you guys.